world can be a sad, serious, upsetting place, so let's talk about some fairy tales that are irreverent, goofy, unexpected, and sometimes raunchier and more vulgar than you could ever have thought. Especially since my last couple of videos about the little match girl murder victims' bodies being made into instruments that sang about their death were dark. The first story I'm going to talk about is The Three Spinners, and it's not raunchy like the other two, but it's still really funny. So in most fairy tales, laziness is a bad thing that brings disaster. Being industrious, being clever, especially in the Grimm fairy tales, that brings good things. But in this one, being lazy pays off. So it starts with this girl who won't do her spinning, and her mom gets so mad because she's just like, I'm gonna do it, that her mom's like beating her. And I swear this really is uplifting and funny. Her mom's like beating her so loudly that the queen passes by and pops her head in, and she's like, hey, what are you beating your daughter for? The mom's embarrassed that her daughter's such a lazy girl, and so she lies and says, well, I'm beating her because she wants to spin all the time. She won't stop working and spinning. So the queen's like, have her come live with me. I love the sound of spinning. I want her to spin 24/7 at my house. It's very Rumpelstiltskin here, where the parents' lie gets the girl to the castle, but she's not being threatened with death. And she's not gonna have to sell her firstborn. So the queen's like, spin all this flax in 3 days and you get to marry my son. Good deal, instant princess. But the girl's so lazy, she's like, I don't wanna. And so after 2 days, she's just sitting there not spinning, and the queen comes in and she's like, why aren't you spinning? I thought you loved to spin. And she's like, I'm so homesick that I'm just sad and I can't spin. But she realizes that's not gonna work tomorrow. She's gonna have to do something soon. So then 3 women appear to her in the night, like Rumpelstiltskin, except they're nice and not gonna ask for her child. One of them has a grotesquely swollen foot. The other one has a giant, huge thumb, and the third has like this big, droopy lip. So they say, we will spin all this for you. All you have to do is invite us to the wedding and sit us at like a seat at the high table. She's like, yeah. And so they spin it for her. So in the morning, the queen's satisfied. They're gonna have the wedding. She invites them to the wedding, calls them her aunts. And so when they show up, the prince is like, oh my God, why are aunts so ugly? Why do they have these 3 specific deformities? And she says all of it came from years of spinning flax. He says, well, that's it. You're never spinning again. And that's the end. She's lazy and she lies and she marries the prince and never has to do the thing she didn't want to do in the first place anyway. And it works out for her. This next one is just absolutely ridiculous and problematic. So in folklore in many different countries, there are a lot of stories that fall into a category called the silence wager. They're mostly stories about foolish people and we're supposed to laugh at them. They don't want to do something and they all say, well, the next person who talks has to do the thing. And then what always happens is that some horrible thing will happen that makes one of them talk, and then they're all like, haha, you. Surprisingly, a lot of this is about shutting the door. Like there's a few stories about like a group of 4 fools, or in some stories, like in a Turkish one, they're opium eaters, where they don't want to shut the door and they're like, whoever talks next has to shut the door. And like a king comes in and like threatens to kill one of them, or something dramatic happens and they end up like being like, okay, don't kill me. And they have to shut the door and everyone's like, haha, you lose. And that's what you're supposed to laugh at. When someone's threatened with death, they're only caring about who has to shut the door. So in this one from Italy, I'm probably saying this wrong, but Sinucchio and Bedovina. So they're arguing about who should shut the door, and they say, well, the first person who speaks has to shut it. The husband sits down on a bench, and the wife takes off her clothes and goes to the bed. So the servant of some gentleman is walking by, and he needs a light for his candle, and he sees that their door's open because they won't shut it. And he wanders inside. He's like, hey, you guys got a light? And he tries to talk to the husband. The husband just sits there, and he's like, hey, not you. And then he sees the wife laying naked, and he's like, hello, do you have a light? And she doesn't respond either. So what happens? I'm gonna read it to you. The servant found her comely, so he laid himself softly down beside her, and though not over well furnished for the task he undertook, contrived to accomplish it, Bedovina keeping dead silent all the while and quietly allowing him to do what he would with her, though her husband saw all that went on. You know, when you just wander into a home and there's a husband and wife and they're not talking and you're like, well, I guess I'll just have sex with this woman, and she just lets you do it. And you're like, all right, doot. And then he leaves. And once he leaves, the wife gets up and she's like, I cannot believe you just sat there and watched that happen. You just let that man come in here and do that to me. And his response is, haha, you talked first. Suck it, you have to shut the door. And the story makes it clear that he is the even bigger fool in this because he has been cuckolded and he doesn't even realize or care about the real problem here. And the last line is actually my favorite because the wife's kind of fine with it. It says, Bedivina, seeing she had indeed lost the wager she had made, and at the same time enjoyed a merry night, shut the door and went to bed with her cuckoldy knave of a husband. That's what makes me okay with this story. She enjoyed her time, and she's like, whatevs. Okay, the last two are about farting and shitting. First of all, there are lots of stories about deceiving the devil with farting. Basically, someone makes a deal with the devil, usually for riches, and part of the deal is that they have to give the devil a task, and if the devil can do it, then he gets to take them to hell and have their soul, but if he can't do it, they just get the riches without having to pay for them. So usually the character rips one, and then they say, all right, bring that back to me. And then he can't. Or in a bunch of them, they fart and then they say, okay, take that fart and tie it in a square knot, which of course the devil can't do. And then they win. There's a character in Germanic folklore, Till Eulenspiegel, basically the protagonist of a European narrative tradition. He's like a jester, knave, silly, goofy, irreverent character, and he's usually depicted with a mirror and an owl because I guess that's what his name is a play on. According to Wikipedia, it's been speculated that it's a pun on a Low German phrase meaning wipe arse, or ass wipe, basically. So I'll close with two stories about this guy involving farts and in one case poop. He's traveling around and he gets hired as an apprentice to a furrier, and he's disgusted by the way the hides smell. He complains about it, but his master, the furrier, is just like, that's how they smell, get used to it. So he thinks to himself, one bad smell could probably get rid of another. So he lets out, quote, a sour fart that's so bad the furrier and his wife have to stop working. And they say, oh my gosh, if you're gonna do that, go outside. And he says no, because farts don't like the cold. They're used to being in a warm place, which is why as soon as you let them out, they rush straight into your nose. And the furrier can't argue, so he just sends him on his way. He's like, you don't work here anymore, but fair point. So in another one, he's staying at an inn in Cologne. Innkeeper is a rogue, and so he shows the other guests to their beds, but he tells Till, you have to sleep on this bench. And he's like, excuse me, I have to sleep on this bench? And the innkeeper's like, yeah. And he farts, and he's like, here's a sheet. Farts again, here's a pillow. Farts again, a big stinky one apparently, and says, look, here's your bed, ha ha ha. And so Till sleeps on the bench, but he's like, I'm gonna get this dude back. So apparently the innkeeper had a nice folding table, and according to the story, Till shits on the table and folds up the leaves to cover up the poop on the table. So then he leaves. And then later, when it's time for the noonday meal, the innkeeper goes to open up the folding table and looked at the poop and said, well, that guy gives what's earned. He paid for a fart with a shit. But the story ends so happy. The innkeeper sends for Till and he has him come back and he's like, hey, I appreciate you. And he's like, I appreciate you. We're both disgusting and tricksters. And so then he gives him a nice bed this time and they stay friends from then on. There are no farts in my retelling of the fairy tale, The 12 Dancing Princesses, Dust Spells, but there is a possible deal with the devil. And no one gets out of it by farting. But even though it's serious and involves murder and ghosts and revenge and a magical world and the Dust Bowl and sisters and a lot of emotional stuff, it is really funny. I don't know if it's shit on a table funny, but it's pretty good.